Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Love Meets Literature. This is the long awaited ACOTAR episode. Joe has finally finished the book, and I'm very, very excited to discuss it and get his thoughts. Before we begin, I'm your host, Rachel, and you can find me on Instagram at Paperbacks and Sketchbooks.
And I am your other host, Joe, and you can find us at Love Meets Literature.
Please do give us a follow. It will help us immensely. So it is the long-awaited ACOTAR discussion. ACOTAR is A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. We are discussing the very first book in the series, and I cannot wait to get all of your thoughts.
Yes, I am very excited to talk about it.
But before we jump into the world of ACOTAR, how has your past reading week been going?
It's been better than it was before. I'm not entirely slumpish. I did read more of Snapshot by Brandon Sanderson, and I read one of the novellas from that list that we had talked about a while ago. I'm blanking on the name of it right now.
The Never Tell collection.
Yes, that collection.
We will be talking about the next two novellas in that collection very, very soon. And I'm excited for those as well because I also finished up the next two. And I will say I liked them a lot more than the first two that we read.
Yeah, I've only read the one so far, but I already liked that one more than both of the other ones.
But we best save our thoughts on those for our next episode because that will be all about novellas 3 and 4 in the Never Tell collection.
Yes, definitely.
So I guess my past reading week has been pretty good. I finished up So Thirsty by Rachel Harrison, and honestly, it was kind of a letdown in my opinion. I feel like it was so hyped and everyone was super excited for it that I was expecting big things, but it just ended up making me want more from it. It was kind of very lackluster in a lot of ways. The characters seemed very shallow. They could have been developed a bit more. And I think the book could have also been a bit longer. It was only about 300 pages long, and I feel like it needed to be longer, so it could have included some more character backstory and just more build up to the big thing that happens. So it's just one of those like mediocre books in my opinion, where at the end I was kind of just like, it was fine. Nothing really special about it.
Yeah, that is pretty disappointing because it appeared in 2 of the different book subscriptions, right?
It was an aardvark pick for September, and we also talked about it on our September new releases episode.
Oh, that's where I'm getting confused.
I mean, I saw a lot of really good reviews for it. However, it just wasn't what I was expecting. Like, it was a vampire novel, as it was advertised as being, but there were just so many ridiculous things that happened in this novel. Like, so much so that I was kind of like, what is happening? Like, why are we doing this?
I wonder if you had stumbled upon it naturally, like without that many reviews, if your rating would have been different.
I don't know. I really don't think so because I was not a huge fan of our main character, Sloane. She was kind of making stupid decisions throughout the entire book, and those stupid decisions were kind of made hand in hand with her best friend, Naomi, who, like, their friendship was the main focus of this story. And they also mentioned in the synopsis that her husband was unfaithful to Sloane. I don't know if you recall.
Yes, I do remember that.
That was present in the book, but it wasn't as big of a deal, I guess, as the synopsis made it sound. Like, it was clear that Sloane's husband was unfaithful to her, but also Sloane had no backbone, so she was kind of just letting it slide. And she seemed very indifferent to it just for like the sake of her marriage. But then, like, almost like the middle to the end of the book, she like ends up seeing some woman come over on their Ring doorbell camera that she like pretended she didn't know how to use the app for it, which is why her husband let her keep the app on her phone. It was just so like it took you until that moment to finally blow up about him cheating on you.
That is odd, that the fact that it would be in the like summary, but then it seems to kind of just be an aside plot point, but I guess I didn't read it, so.
I mean, honestly, it's not worth reading in my opinion.
Oh.
I gave it 3.5 stars because I did think that Rachel Harrison's take on vampires was really clever. Like, she kind of had them kind of like not in a cult, but also it was just like this group of vampires that would like travel together and around, and they would like do blood bank heists and steal all the blood instead of killing people.
That's interesting.
So that was super interesting. And I mean, she did stick to the whole like vampires are immortal thing, but she added a twist to that where the vampires, they have to do something to become a vampire. So, like, it's not like you're born a vampire.
Right.
You have to become a vampire, and you can become a vampire at any stage in your life. And once you're at that stage in your life, say you become a vampire at like 60 years old, you'll be 60 years old forever and ever and ever and ever. It's not like you magically become youthful again.
Right.
So I thought her spin on vampires was really clever. It wasn't like the overdone commercial vampire that you see on television. These vampires, they were like, garlic doesn't work on us and all that kind of stuff.
So they kind of turned the trope a little bit on its head.
A little bit, and it made it more refreshing to read. Although I didn't really know what to expect going into this book. It was a very slow build, so it was kind of like losing my interest a little bit at the beginning because it was just following Sloane and Naomi on this girls' trip. I don't know. It was just fine. It was fine.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with fine.
No, but when you were expecting it to be more than fine, it's kind of a letdown.
Yeah, that's true. I could definitely agree with that.
But I know a lot of people really did love So Thirsty, so I would still recommend it to satirical horror fans.
Oh, there you go. Something for everybody.
Yes, something for everybody, I guess. So that was So Thirsty by Rachel Harrison. I personally rated it 3.5 stars. So obviously this episode is our ACOTAR discussion, and I am very, very excited for it. We will be including spoilers, so if you have not read A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas just yet, and you are planning to, I would skip to the very end of this episode just to avoid any potential spoilers that would make you upset.
Yes, this will include spoilers. I'm saying it again just so everybody hears it.
You have been warned. So before we dive into ACOTAR, what made you want to read this book? It's so out of the norm for you.
Well, I like fantasy, but I've never been very interested in the romance aspect. A lot of the times when you read a fantasy book that is more geared towards just the fantasy or the action, there's typically a romance subplot of some kind, but it's not super focused. And for whatever reason, it might have just been from outside influences mainly, but this one seemed to be interesting because I had seen some stuff online about it, and the world itself seemed really cool. And like Sarah J. Maas is an incredible writer, and so the writing seemed really good. The only thing that and I'm going to talk about this later, but the only thing I didn't like was the romance parts of this pretty much. Everything else I thought was really good.
If all the romance was taken out of it, do you think the book would have still been good though?
Remember when we went through those questions together?
Yes.
This is one of those books that falls into the category of like, I wish I could have told Sarah J. Maas the genre and then she would have written this book. Just take out the romance or reduce it a little bit and then add more grit and grim to it to make it more intense. And this would have been easily like a 5 out of 5 for me.
Interesting. You see, I think the romance makes it different than other fantasy books.
Yeah, I think if that's what you want, then that's a positive, right? If you don't want to be kind of the same as other fantasy books, which I think is fine. That's, obviously people love this book. But personally, I love their abilities. I love the magic system that they have. I have complaints about it, but I'll get to that later. And I think everything in the world, the way it exists, seems really awesome. And I kind of thought it was going to go a little bit darker because they kept talking about like the war and stuff between the humans and the what are they called, fairies, right?
Yeah, the Fae.
And so that part I thought was really interesting, and I thought they were going to kind of lean more into that. And so like anytime it gets darker, I was getting more excited. But then anytime it was like lighter and there was like more romancy things happening, because there's something that I want to talk about, which is what I have named the romance brain or romanticy brain, which is it's kind of like a thing in TV shows and movies where people just do dumb things or do things that don't make sense because they're like in love.
Well, if you're looking for dark, you might want to continue the series because not everything in the other books is this lighthearted romancy stuff.
I mean, that what really piques my interest then because that's kind of what I wanted the entire time from this. And not to say, I would also like to clarify, I loved this book. I thought it was really, really good. And even though I wasn't a fan of some of the romance stuff, it's still, I know before I rated it a 4 out of 5, but I think I actually have moved it up to like a 4.5 out of 5.
Well, it's one of those books where if you just think about it, like you sit there with your thoughts, you're like, that was actually pretty good.
Yeah, I would agree. Like, as I went over my notes again, it was like writing things down. I kept being like, oh man, that was such like a cool scene, or that was so intense, or even some of the romance stuff, like when it was done, I'm using air quotes, like well, for my interpretation, I really enjoyed it. It was just, again, some of those like romance brain, like, why would you do that? That doesn't make any sense in this scenario.
Well, when I did my reread, I actually bumped my rating up. I originally rated it a 4, and in my reread, I gave it 4.5. But honestly, I'd probably bump it up to a 5 because there's just a lot of really good foreshadowing that happens that you don't really notice when you read it for the first time. It's one of those things that you have to catch on the second time around because
Yeah.
they're like little Easter eggs almost for the other books.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, I'm really excited to continue through the rest of the series to see kind of what I remember. It's also nice because I've put a bunch of my notes down so then I can kind of refer to it later and be like, oh, that was alluding to that or something like that.
Yeah, so let's dive into it. We are going to try to talk about everything in order of occurrence in the book. However, with it being a little bit now since I've done my reread, things might get a little muddled in there. However, all of the things we are talking about are things that do happen in the first book only. So we have the beginning, the opening scene. Feyre is in the forest hunting, and she runs into this mysterious man, this mysterious creature. She's not really sure what it is. Did you have any thoughts regarding that scene?
So that's where she stumbles upon the deer and then, by extension, the wolf. And then she kills the wolf. I just kept thinking, why would you kill the wolf? Like, I know that she did it in a literal sense to get like food for her family because she needed the deer. But I just remember thinking, like, if you truly think that this could potentially be that incredibly dangerous fae that you keep hearing about, why would you do it? And then, as an aside, she skinned the wolf.
She did because they could sell the pelt for money.
Right. But what does that mean since he was a fae? Did she like skin him like his human, well, he's not human, but
Well, he was in his wolf form when she killed him.
just seems crazy, like kind of gross.
I know, when you really think about it, you think it's really nasty.
Yeah.
But at this point, she wasn't entirely sure if it was a fae.
Yeah, I guess she didn't know that they actually like existed for the most part.
Well, she didn't think they could get over the wall.
That too, yeah. She knew they existed, but yeah, didn't think that they could cross.
Right, because it's kind of explained in the beginning that there was this whole war between the human realm and Prithian and stuff with the wall and whatnot. And the humans and the Fae are now divided because of that war. And nobody's supposed to be able to cross the wall. However, there's a fatal flaw in this wall, and there are pockets where you are able to cross.
Right. I just remember thinking, again, if you really think that this could truly be the thing, because that's what she says. She's like, is this doesn't look right, something, something. And then I was just like, well, then don't do it. Get out of there.
She's desperate
But
for money
yeah, I mean, that's also true.
because her family doesn't really help her out on that front.
I guess they were also literally actively starving too, so that kind of makes sense.
They were. So that kind of brings me into Feyre's family. After she's done hunting, she goes back to her village, and we get introduced to her sisters, Elaine and Nesta, and we're also introduced to her father, who's nameless. Did you notice that?
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I don't remember ever seeing them actually say a name. I didn't they have like a family name? That's what I couldn't remember, like a last name.
Yeah, their last name is Archeron.
Okay, that's what I thought. But yeah, I think it was before he was always just like referenced by that last name. I don't remember ever being heard of by his first name.
Correct. So when you met Elaine and Nesta for the first time, what did you think of them? Because I had some very strong feelings.
I really thought that Nesta was going to play a bigger role in the story. And I guess she kind of does, but it's later.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I gathered later, it seems like she's going to continue to play a large role throughout the rest of the books, possibly.
So Nesta is a very much disliked character for a lot of people, which I don't really understand why, because I never really found her to be a bad person. I think she was more so just looking out for Feyre. I don't think she was trying to do anything bad towards her.
I mean, in the beginning, she's definitely a bad person. Like, all she does is spend the money on things that they don't really need.
Well, yes.
She's constantly belittling the only person that literally feeds them and gives them money.
Right. But Elaine doesn't help in that matter either.
No. It was interesting to me that there was so much anger between Nesta and her father, which again made me think that there's like more to this home life story that I feel like we didn't get that much of a taste of yet.
Well, we got a little bit because it explained that their dad used to have all these riches and he would invest people's money, but then a ship gets hijacked or whatever. All the riches are lost, and now he's nothing because he had to owe all these people that he invested money with.
Right.
And the investors came when they smashed his leg, which the children were there to see. And now he has a bad leg and he has kind of lost all hope for life.
Right.
But I have beef with her dad because he doesn't do anything either to try and help the situation.
He was like arguably one of the worst people. Like, not a bad character. He was written well, but he's a terrible person. Like, just to completely give up on your 3 daughters, like, I thought that was kind of crazy. And I think it made you want to not like him, which is fine. But I just remember thinking that, like, there's really nothing redeemable about this guy.
And maybe that's why he was never given a name.
It's possible. I didn't really have any thoughts on Elaine. Well, I have predictions for her future, but I figured maybe we would save that towards the end. But like, as a character, she just kind of seemed like someone there.
Yeah, she is just kind of there. She tries to step in between Feyre and Nesta's bickering, and she's really the only one who takes care of their dad. So she's there for that purpose. But remember, when Feyre visits her home in the middle of the story, Elaine kind of becomes more prominent.
Yeah, and we'll talk about my predictions when we get there.
Yes,
but.
yes. So while Feyre is spending time at home, this big thing suddenly happens where this mysterious person this being, whatever he is, comes and demands that Feyre go with him to Prithian. Did you have a feeling that that was related to the killing of the beast in the beginning?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's very obvious. But were you expecting this Fae to put a spell on her entire family, which makes them think that she's gone to visit a relative and she wasn't stolen from them?
No, that part was kind of a curveball.
It kind of changes the course of the story when you think about it, because now they're under false impressions and they think Feyre's in one spot doing one thing
Right.
with this aunt that doesn't even exist or whatever. Maybe she exists. I don't know. But really, she's taken across the wall to live with this Fae that she hates because they've learned from a young age to hate the Fae.
Yeah, the whole introduction of that and her travel, I guess you'd call it, even though she was knocked unconscious or with magic, I'm not sure. That whole aspect was really interesting to me. The part that I wasn't a huge fan of is why, or I guess how she went about like hating him so much. I get that it was like ingrained into her, but it's like at some point you gotta pick. Do you hate the guy or do you not hate the guy? And there's like a lot of this push and pull that kind of annoyed me a little bit throughout the story.
Yeah, I was very annoyed with Feyre when she's first introduced to Prithian, because she just keeps acting like a brat. Like, she was horrible to them. Like, she didn't want to give them the time of day. She was just going to wither away in her bedroom. She didn't even want to be in the bedroom. Like, she didn't want to be there. Like, where did she think she was going to go? You're just stuck here. You're not going to walk 4 days back to the wall because a Fae will see you and they will kill you because you're a human.
Yeah, that was kind of the part that I felt was the first instance of what I've called romance brain, which is like Feyre is this incredibly skilled hunter. Like that is something that's talked about throughout the entire story. It's no doubt that she can hunt. She's obviously done it for a long time and she knows what she's doing. But then when she first gets to the manor or the castle or whatever you want to call it, she constantly does this thing where she's like not thinking ahead, but then at the same time she is. She's walking around looking for hiding places and looking for exits and all this kind of stuff, but then she's not thinking about what happens if you actually get out of the exit.
Right.
She hasn't tried to take the time to learn what are the creatures around here? What are they capable of? And when she does, she only ever does like a very surface level analysis. She's like, oh, that thing is bad, it'll kill me, stay away. It's like, what, girl, what are you doing? Stop trying to just run and think about like, I don't know, a long-term strategy. That's kind of the thing that bothered me. I was like, all you're doing is thinking about the next 5 seconds.
That's true. She is a very skilled hunter, but she was not very skilled when she was in the Spring Court.
It was also clear that she was not very skilled in social situations.
No, but again, I think that goes back to just how she grew up. They did grow up with status until her dad lost all their riches, and then they were basically living in a shack in this dinky little town, poor. And she didn't really talk to a whole lot of people other than her boyfriend, boy toy, whatever he was, and her family.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that kid.
He was very irrelevant in my opinion. So when Feyre goes to Prithian, I think she also doesn't know how to communicate with these people because she was always taught to hate them. And so she just has all this resentment and hatred built up inside her where she basically just doesn't want to give them the time of day.
Yeah, and that was, like you mentioned, she was just acting like a brat, which I thought was really weird coming from, again, a character that we just established is like almost a surrogate father figure, like going out and hunting and taking care of her sisters and making all these sacrifices. Like she was, I guess, more of just a parental figure in general, and then she turns around and acts like a 5-year-old.
Yep. And she's trying to hide all these knives and daggers on her so she can try and kill them when they're not watching so she can escape. But I don't know what she thinks she's going to do when she escapes.
if I remember correctly, throughout the story, especially when she first gets there, she steals like 5 knives or
Yeah.
something like that. There's so many of them. And that also, again, what you just mentioned, I don't know what she thought. Like, Tamlin clearly has ginormous claws. It's mentioned
Mhm.
a million times, and he can barely restrain himself from keeping them inside of his body. Like, girl, he is going to slash your face off before you can stab him. I can assure you of that.
But do you remember the one scene where she was sleeping in her bedroom in the spring court and she thought she saw her father outside the window,
Yes.
but it ended up being this horrible creature? And that's when Tamlin was like, you can't go outside without somebody watching you, because she could have gotten killed.
Yeah. That was when I thought she was going to turn to more of like an analytical person and be like, okay, I really need to think out my plans now and I really need to figure out what I'm supposed to do. And then she just kind of was like, I'm just going to keep putting knives up my sleeves and trying to, I don't know, hide. And I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well, there is one person in the spring court that Feyre doesn't entirely hate, and that is Lucien. What do we think about Lucien?
He is easily my favorite character of this whole story throughout the entire book, I should say.
I do really like Lucien. I like him a lot. I like that he also is not really that cruel to Feyre. I mean, Tamlin's not trying to be cruel to Feyre, but I think Tamlin's intentions are all wrong from the start. But then you have Lucien, who I feel like very clearly is trying to make Feyre feel like she's at home, like there's some sense of normalcy when she interacts with him.
Their relationship to me definitely felt more natural because there was no like expectations between the two. As where with Tamlin, there was what's revealed later as very obvious expectations between the two. They almost had like a brother sister relationship. Like they were just,
Hmm.
kind of poking fun at each other, horsing around a little bit. It just felt very normal. It felt very natural.
It did. I also liked that Lucien didn't really keep secrets from Feyre. If Feyre asked a question, he would give her the answer, but also give it to her in a roundabout way. He was
Yeah.
very sly about how he handed information out to Feyre.
The comparison that I made between the two, or of Lucian, I should say, was that he reminded me of in The Witcher, there's like certain higher beings that are still monsters, like
Hmm.
devils and vampires and things like that.
Hmm.
And a lot of the times they skirt the rules of the world. And that's kind of what Lucian did. He like constantly was skirting by the rules and like being almost like a little bit of a trickster. He kind of reminded me of like Loki a little bit from
Okay.
the Marvel universe, of just constantly being riding on thin ice in some places to skate by, and then plausible deniability constantly anytime you
Hmm.
can. So I really liked him. I think he's easily one of the best characters.
And he gave Feyre the information she needed to capture the Suriel,
That's true.
which the Suriel ends up telling Feyre something very, very important to the rest of the story, which is to stay with the High Lord. And Feyre learns that Tamlin is a High Lord because of that. She had no idea what Tamlin was, what his standing in the Spring Court was, other than he was a High Fae. But she didn't realize he's the ruler of the Spring Court. But one important thing to keep in mind is that the Suriel never says specifically who the High Lord is.
That was kind of a thought that was sitting in the back of my mind the entire time. And I thought it was really interesting that throughout the story, you learn that just about everybody she's interacted with has either they are a High Lord or they have the potential to be one, which I thought was really interesting.
It keeps you guessing, and you're kind of like, is she going to end up with Tamlin? Is she not going to end up with Tamlin? So it's just one of those things that makes me really love how Sarah J. Maas lays out a story.
Yes. The other thing, too, is what I thought was interesting is that he, or I guess you'd call it a he, the Suriel specifies stay close to the High Lord.
Yes.
He doesn't say marry them or have a relationship or, any of these things. It's just stay close to them. And I've interpreted that as maybe it is physically, like maybe there's a situation she's going to be in where she just has to be near one for some reason, or it could be a deeper relationship like that. So
I think it meant something that happens under the mountain, which we will discuss in a little bit.
Okay. Yeah.
While Feyre's in Prithian, she also notices that there's something off, and she learns that it's this thing called the Blight. So all of the magic is a lot weaker than it normally is, and she can't really get a clear answer out of Tamlin of what the Blight exactly is.
Yeah, this is where I kind of started to dislike Tamlin, because all of the conversations were so... He walked around the subjects in the exact opposite way that Lucian did.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean is Lucian was like clever and sly about it, and Tamlin was just like blunt and like not answering certain things.
He was very standoffish at times. And I'm like, how... Like, why is Feyre falling for this guy? Is this like some sort of Stockholm syndrome thing that's happening? Because there's no way, if she were in her right mind, she would like Tamlin.
No, I don't know if you got this, but yeah, throughout the entire story, I'm like, the only reason you like this guy is because you were forced to spend so much time with him. You are 100% Stockholm syndromed. Because I was also thinking the entire time, I'm like, why do you like Tamlin over Lucian? I'm like, I would be all over Lucian compared to Tamlin.
Well, it's because Lucian would never make a move on Feyre because of what we find out about Tamlin.
Well, yeah, but I just remember thinking the entire time that like if Tamlin was like nicer, I don't know why he was so angry.
I think he was angry because of the Blight and everything that was happening with Under the Mountain.
Right, but I mean, there's certain requirements that has to be met, right, that we learn later.
Yes.
And this is the first time again, this is kind of all revealed later, but in like hundreds of years or however long it's been, he's the closest he's ever been, and he's still just like so mad about it the entire time.
I know, like, buddy, you can like ease off the anger a little bit.
Right. This
She's
is
right
like
there.
To me, it was like spending your entire life training for the Olympics, and then you get there and then you're just like a party pooper and a pessimist and mad the whole time.
Well, did you ever think that maybe he was angry because she wasn't just submitting to what he wanted right away?
Yes, but also, what did he want?
He needs a wife.
He never ever says anything like that.
I know. He never even told her what it was.
He doesn't even say that like she likes her. The one time he tried flirting, it was like two introverts trying to flirt with each other.
Oh, it was so awkward.
Yeah, I'm like, what are you doing, dude? You had 46 years or however long it's been to like practice flirting or something. Like, I just remember thinking the entire time, I'm like, this guy truly was an introvert that was forced to work as an extrovert. That's what it is.
Yeah, well, he also never made his intentions clear, but I think it's because he never wanted to tell Feyre about what exactly his role is in the Blight.
Right. I mean, there are things that are revealed later where he literally couldn't say certain things.
Oh, that's true. He couldn't. It was part of his curse.
Right. But at the same time, again, like he could have just, first of all, started with complimenting her or making her feel comfortable or, all these different things. And he just like didn't do any of that.
What did you think about the Spring Court's curse? I thought it was odd, personally.
I thought the symbolism was really cool because, so for context, the Spring Court was cursed to wear masquerade masks, essentially.
Yes, because the curse happened when they were having a masquerade ball.
The masks were worn in celebration of Tamlin's shape-shifting ability. That was the guise that they were put under. And I really like the symbolism because it was, in a literal sense, they were masking who they truly were.
Oh, true.
And that's what I really liked. One of the other characters that I don't want to forget to mention is, and ironically I forgot her name, but like the servant lady that's with Feyre the entire time, like when she's
Alice.
Alice.
Mm-hmm.
I loved her.
I really did like Alice too.
She was my other favorite character, probably. It was really cool that Sarah J. Maas wrote even this side character with like a real motive and like a real storyline and a real plot to her. It like really made me think about her. And like when other stuff goes down, it makes me think in my head, I'm like, oh my gosh, I wonder what happened to her.
Well, Alice was the most helpful when Feyre asked her questions about the blight and what this so-called under the mountain thing is.
Right.
Because all Feyre could get were little bits and pieces from conversation that she could overhear, but she could never figure out what exactly was happening. And when the whole under the mountain thing is revealed, I was like, oh my God, what?
Yeah, that was a super cool plot point. I really liked that.
So you'd probably be better at describing under the mountain than I would. So what is under the mountain?
Under the mountain is, well, it started off as like a sacred grounds. That's a big important point. And the sacred grounds was overtaken by the evil lady.
Amarantha.
Amarantha, that's her name, who I also loved. She was a fantastic character.
A lot of people really hate Amarantha.
What? She's a great, well, I guess you're supposed to. She's the bad guy.
Well, yeah, you're supposed to hate her, but they really hate her for what she did to Reese, which we haven't touched on Reese yet, but we will.
Essentially, this under the mountain was taken over by her, and she built her lair there. And she had been tricking high lords and different courts and things like that to come to her lair under the false pretenses that she was going to like be buddy and set up trade routes and be friends with everybody. And instead, she tricked all of them and stole their magic.
Yes, and that's what the blight is.
Right. And then this under the mountain becomes her sort of home, her almost her own pseudo court where she traps everybody and she doesn't allow anybody to leave except for certain individuals, one of which was Tamlin and some of his servants.
When Feyre learns about all of that, she is all gung-ho and she's like, well, now I need to go under the mountain. And I'm like, girl, are you serious?
We should back up a little bit and talk about that ridiculous festival.
Oh, Cal and Mai. Oh
Yeah.
my God, Cal and Mai.
This was easily the only thing in the book that prevents it from being a 5 out of 5 for me.
What was your beef with Cal and Mai?
When they were basically like, oh yeah, to release all the magic into the spring court, Tamlin has to,
Always gotta get frisky with the lady.
Yeah. I was just like, I'm sitting there, I have the book open, I read that, and I roll my eyes. I was just like, that is ridiculous.
Yeah, Cal and Mai was a bit of an odd scene, but it was pertinent to the story because Feyre did meet a very important character, which the name of the character is not revealed during Cal and Mai, but we can all kind of guess who it is.
Introducing that character was the only thing that kept that scene or that entire stretch from being like literally useless to the story, other than furthering, I guess, the romance side of things, which again, like the whole thing just didn't make sense to me.
No, it was a little strange. I especially really hated how Tamlin was trying to lock Feyre inside and keep her from going out during Cal and Mai.
They didn't force her to stay by any physical means, but they constantly kept telling her like, don't leave your room, make sure to lock up your room and like board it up and all this kind of stuff. Like, I just didn't understand why they couldn't just tell her, because that information wasn't locked behind blight or anything like that. Like, why couldn't you just be like, hey, during this time everybody is like a cat in heat, so probably don't go outside. And then she would be like, excuse me? And then he'll be like, yeah, everyone will want to try to get frisky with you. And she would be like, then I'm going inside.
Feyre, you see, my issue with Feyre is that she's going to do whatever she wants to do anyway. So if she wanted to be out during Cal and Mai, she was going to find a way to go outside.
Right, which is why I think they should have just been literal with her. Because at this point, she still like hates everybody with the exception of she started to like Tamlin. And at this point, she's like a pretty good friend with Lucian. But then that's it. So that part I thought was ridiculous. But Moving on.
Yes, moving on. There is a point in the story where Tamlin does tell Feyre to go back home. And she goes home and she finds that her family's no longer living in decrepit conditions.
Yes.
They have a mansion. And Feyre's like, what in the world happened here? But that was Tamlin's payment for stealing Feyre.
And he did tell her that like 1,000 times, I've taken care of your family. And she just didn't believe him.
Mm-hmm. But it's especially important when Feyre goes home because she learns that Nesta tried to cross the wall to save her.
Right, because Nesta, even though she was affected by the magic, the glamour, or whatever they call it, she remembered. She remembered through it and was able to push through, which I think was the turning point for her character. And it revealed that she is like way more important than I originally gave her credit for.
Yes. So I really like Nesta. I think she really cares about Feyre. She doesn't want Feyre to be stolen by the Fae.
I also think, and this is part of my predictions for future books, so don't say anything. But this is where I think Nesta changes, right? She becomes like a really important character. And then by extension, I have an assumption that some sort of relationship about Nesta or something like that is going to become important to the Fae or Prythian or something along those lines in the future.
Interesting. Well, you'll have to see if those predictions are right.
And then this is also the part where after everything that happens with like Elaine, where they're like, her and Feyre are like buddy buddy and good friends and all that kind of stuff. And then Elaine's like, I want to travel and garden or whatever. After reading that, I also realized that she is primed to get murdered in a further book. My prediction is that Elaine does not make it through the rest of the series, but we'll see.
Yeah, you'll just have to see.
But back to Under the Mountain.
Yes, Under the Mountain. So it is actually when Feyre returns to Prythian from being home, despite Tamlin's wishes. Tamlin didn't want her to come back, I don't think.
Right.
That's when she coerces Alice into telling her about Under the Mountain.
And then Feyre takes all of the knives she's stolen and makes her way to the mountain. And then Alice gives Feyre really important advice that's later used. That part I thought was really interesting. And again, I really liked how Alice played such an important role despite her kind of being a side character. She was super cool. But then Feyre goes into the mountain, in which she gets captured and brought in front of Amarantha. And she was amazing. I thought she was an incredible villain. She was evil, like actually evil.
Mm-hmm.
She was incredibly cruel. And she wasn't just one of those villains that's like, I do bad stuff because I'm bad. She was like, I am a terrible person and I love that I am bad. And so she just does horrible things to people.
Yes, she does. And this is when we get to learn more about Rhysand, who is the High Lord of the Night Court. And he becomes important to Feyre when she's under the mountain because he sort of helps her in a way.
Yeah, I got a lot of feelings about this guy. But for context, what happens is instead of just getting rid of Feyre, Amarantha gives her a series of trials to allow Feyre to prove her love to Tamlin.
I loved the trials.
The trials were cool. I like those. Tamlin was under a curse, which was what he called the Blight. So one of the big rules of this curse is that he wasn't allowed to actually talk about it. Nobody in the Spring Court was allowed to talk about it, which is why Tamlin talked the way he did and why Lucian had to walk around things and even why Alice couldn't say certain things. All of it was locked around this curse that was given to them.
So what was Tamlin's curse?
He was cursed for 49 years or 77 years or something along those lines.
It was some large number.
The only way he could break it is he had to find and marry a human woman that had to hate the Fae.
So much so that she would kill a Fae.
And technically, I don't remember if it actually says that they needed to marry, but I do remember they mentioned in there it needed to say, just remember it saying something about like saying, I love you.
Yeah, those words also had to be spoken. And I think she had to tell him that she loved him. However, Feyre does not say those words easily.
No, which I also thought was stupid. I was like, just say it. Throughout all of this, when she gets there, she's tasked with these trials, Feyre that is, and she's forced to go through them while also being locked in a dungeon. The trials happen every full moon. And then the other thing is Amarantha gives her a riddle. The riddle is important because she adds the ruling that if Feyre can answer this riddle at any point, she is immediately freed and everyone around her is immediately saved, basically. It's like a cheat code to just solve all the problems. This is the part that annoyed me a little bit about the story, where Amarantha, when she's setting up the rules with the trials, there's all these little constant, like, she's like a genie. Like any little thing that she didn't specify, she's going to hold against you. Which I thought was like a little nitpicky for a kind of story like this, but
it also fits Amarantha's personality because she would be the kind of villain who does that.
Yeah, that's true. She definitely is the kind of person that, because again, she's so evil and cruel and vile. Like,
So this is where one of my things about what the Surreal said kind of come into motion, where the Surreal says, stay close to the High Lord. Well, Rhys ended up creating this sort of bond between him and Feyre. So that could be an interpretation of what the Surreal said.
It's also true. So during the first trial, she is tasked with, she has to
Is it the worm?
fight the worm, yeah, in the poop pit or whatever it is. The aftermath is the important thing, which is she is severely injured and her wound is very clearly infected. That's when Rhys comes by and does the tattoo thing and then also restores her health, basically.
Yeah, they made a bargain so she wouldn't die.
Yes, and the bargain was she has to spend 1 week every month with him in the night court. Gross, dude. Why'd you phrase it like that? I hated Rhys, by the way. I think
What's wrong with Rhys?
He's a terrible person.
Well, maybe it's because I've already read the whole series, so I like Rhys. But why don't you like Rhys?
So the following things that happen before the second trial, I believe, is when he puts her in a very revealing outfit, paints her entire body. And the reason he does that is because then if anybody touches the paint, he will know that it's been smudged. That's the whole point. And then he spends the next weeks and weeks until the next trial forcing her to drink the wine and dance in front of everybody and then sit on his lap. That's the rest of the story, basically, until the next trial happens. The reason why he does that is revealed later, but it was just like incredibly gross. And it just made me truly hate Rhys.
Well, Rhys was a very different man under the mountain.
He's still not a good guy.
It's because Amarantha was very degrading towards him.
Well, yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. He's also in a terrible situation where he's essentially being forced to have relations with Amarantha.
Well, and he was just trying to get a rise out of Amarantha.
And out of Tamlin,
Yeah,
which
out
is
of both
revealed
of them.
later. Then the next trial happens, which is she's tattooed at this point, which is important. She's locked into a chamber where she has to pull a lever based on, I think it was like a math question. And it wasn't ever revealed what the question was because Feyre can't really read. She's not very good at it. And thankfully, even though she can't read, her tattooed arm gives her an indication on which lever she needs to pull. So then after that happens, the exact same thing continues to happen with Rhys, where he, every single night, by the way, he makes her get drunk, paints her body, and then forces her to dance in, might I add, if I haven't said it before, extremely revealing clothing in front of everybody. She is essentially a unwilling, she did not want this, exotic dancer for the entirety of the Fae. So there's like a major party dance thing that happens. And at this point, Amarantha is like, she's almost like growing bored of Feyre. She doesn't think that she has what it takes. She doesn't kind of just writes her off. So Feyre is kind of allowed to just like be there. Tamlin and Feyre sneak off to a closet and they try to be intimate. However, they're interrupted by Rhys, who then kicks Tamlin out. Rhys realizes that all the paint is smudged on Feyre, and so he like has to magically erase it from Tamlin. And before he can correct it on her, Amarantha shows up with her posse. And so Rhys throws himself at Feyre to try to cover up the fact that it wasn't him that did it originally. And that's when it started to reveal like Rhys is doing all of this for one, to upset Amarantha, two, to upset Tamlin, but then also three, because if he can keep an eye on her and keep Feyre in his presence, he can keep her safe. That's the whole point. Still a horrible way to do it, in my opinion, but
Yes, but everything under the mountain was horrible.
it did make sense in a messed up sort of way. And I guess I wanted dark, right? But at the same time, gross.
Well, the last challenge Feyre could not complete because she was told to put a dagger through the hearts of these three people in front of her.
Yes, Amarantha wanted to prove that Feyre still hates the Fae. Very gruesome, very dark. Loved this whole scene, by the way. It was very good. And she does it with the first two. And then on the third one, it's revealed that the third person that she has to stab is Tamlin. After everything, she remembers that Tamlin has a heart of stone. And so she stabs him, but the blade bends because it hits his heart of stone. And so thus she's completed what she needed to do. However, due to Amarantha being evil, she goes, well, I didn't say when I was going to free everybody. And also, she's trying to pull out all these like rules, basically. And that's when basically everything breaks out and people start like fighting. And Rhys even tries to like hit Amarantha and take her down. And Amarantha is using her magic to beat up Feyre. And then that's when Feyre reveals the answer to the riddle.
But then something horrible happens and Feyre ends up almost dying and she's brought back to life as a High Fae.
Yes, by the powers of all the other High Lords and High Fae.
She's a High Fae now. She's not a human.
That I thought was actually a very fitting sort of ending for her, even though the love part and this part all happening was a little bit predictable.
The worst part for me is that she went back to the Spring Court.
Yes. So, first of all, if I was her, I would have woken up and I would have been like, hey, Tamlin, we got a lot of things we got to work on and talk about, buddy. But first, before that, this guy, Rhys, yeah, let's end him. We're going to put him in the ground real quick.
Yeah.
So I would go and do that. And
well,
then
Tamlin's not happy about her bond with Rhys and the bargain. He's not happy about that at all.
I know, but I would be like, hey, did you forget that he made me dance in revealing clothes in front of everybody for like 3 straight months?
I think it's just an unspoken thing that was fine because it was under the mountain and nobody was doing anything out of their own will.
Anyway, I still would have been like, let's get rid of this guy. Would have got rid of him. And then I'm assuming if he were to die, it would probably break the seal. Otherwise, I'd just lose my arm and I'd be like, all right, let's deal with that. And then after that, I would 100% break up with Tamlin. And I'd be like, hey, Lucian, you and I, let's go make our own court or something like that. Or
That's
take over
not-
the night court because she just got rid of the night court guy.
You've got a lot of reading to do with the next books because none of that happens.
I just can't believe that Rhys was like let off sort of basically with nothing, no repercussions. And then at the very end, they're like standing on the little platform or whatever, the balcony. And then she like almost kind of feels sorry for him. And then he like leaves or whatever.
Yeah, sounds like Rhys.
I did not like that part. I do not like Rhys.
But their magic is back.
And so the story ends on like a happy note, right? Like they're all powerful again.
So, I mean, it sounds like overall you really liked it.
I did. I bashed on quite a few things. However, overall, I really did like it. The only parts that genuinely were kind of like why, or like I didn't think it needed to be in the story, was that festival thing.
But Cal and Mai was important because the mysterious fae that she met was Reese.
Yeah, but they could have done that scene literally any other way. And then she could have just met Reese. Like, what I imagined, if they really wanted that to happen, that festival is happening. Feyre goes to leave and then runs into him. Or that festival just doesn't happen at all, and Tamlin and Lucian are called away and they can't reveal that they have to go underneath the mountain or something like that. I don't know. I just thought it was kind of ridiculous that the whole spring court is powered by being intimate, because that makes me go, well, then what's going to happen next time? Because they have to do it every year.
Oh, well, I mean, that's a good point.
I'm assuming I can guess what's going to happen.
We never really find out.
They don't mention it ever again.
I don't think Cal and Mai is mentioned in book 2, not that I can remember.
That's even more disappointing, because then it truly means that it didn't matter at all. And it was just an avenue to show or to introduce Reese.
Yeah, I mean, you can dissect Cal and Mai all you want, like you can with any of the scenes in this book. But I mean, overall, I love ACOTAR. I love it. And I need you to read book 2 because I think your thoughts on Reese will change and it will explain more of your feelings towards him.
I mean, I hope, because right now he's pretty much an irredeemable character, in my opinion.
No, he can redeem himself.
I mean, Tamlin is also, like, I didn't really like him. Lucian was really, like, of the love interests that could potentially be there, Lucian's the only one that I think is, like, a genuine good person.
Well, all I'm going to say is you're just going to have to read book 2 and you may be disappointed by some things.
Lovely. Love that. Obviously, a lot of people love the books, so it's not like it can be that bad. And I think that the story was extremely interesting. I think all of the magic is super cool. I think the curse, like, what would you call that curse? Reveal, I guess. That whole plot was amazing. And it made total sense. It made you realize why Tamlin did all the things he did and Lucian did all the things they did. I really liked that the advice that Alice gave revealed like all of these different scenes from previous in the book, and it gave reason to all of those scenes and stuff like that. That part was really, really cool, and it was great writing.
I know I just reread this book, but I want to read it again.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think this is worth the reread, especially like you mentioned, where if you were to read through the whole series and then go back and read it again, I bet it gets even better every single time.
It really does. It really does. I need to start my reread of the 3rd book, A Court of Wings and Ruin. So I'd say overall, very successful discussion. I always love talking about ACOTAR, and this jogged my memory about a lot of things that happened. I'm not always really good at remembering things that happen. I'm especially not good at keeping things in order. So,
yeah, I'm assuming we forgot some of the nuanced context or things like that, but that just is the reason to go and read it yourself.
Yeah, if you've been wanting to reread ACOTAR, or if our discussion made you want to read ACOTAR, even though we just spoiled the whole story for you, I can promise you the book is much better than our discussion.
Yes, I can assure you that reading the book will give you more information than we would have time to cover. And then also, if you're somebody like me who is not into romance at all, I still think this is a good read. There is romance, but a lot of it is just dialogue between characters, and there's not so much like spicy scenes or anything like that. There's a couple, but they are relatively, I was going to say vague, but that's not entirely. There's one that's a little bit too descriptive for my taste.
Well, I will say that this is the least romantic one of the series.
I mean, I still think that this is a great read.
Fantastic series. I don't care what anyone says. I love Sarah J. Maas. I think she is a genius. I love her books. But I'm about ready to go dive into what I'm currently reading, which is The Tournament of Heirs by Amelia Perez, and it is an advanced copy. It's not out yet. It's really good so far. It has to do with like Aztec mythology. And is there anything you are going to be reading this week?
I'm still just working through Snapshot. That's my goal, is to get through Snapshot by Brandon Sanderson, and then we'll move on to the next thing.
Well, I hope everyone has another great week. I know, unfortunately, in the Chicago area, it is still going to be a little bit hot. We are back into summer, although I just want fall to begin already. And maybe go pick up ACOTAR if you haven't read it yet. Maybe do a reread of ACOTAR if this inspired you. Or just, read whatever you want. And happy reading.